Hello everybody and welcome to this video which is going to focus on question 5 on paper 1 of the AQA GCSE English language exam. So I know I've done quite a few videos on this question, which is the writing to describe or narrate one, but I came across an idea from a guy called Nick Wells, and you'll find him on Twitter at NSMWells, and he's great. He's got loads of different ideas, and I came across this a couple of months back. And it's an interesting way to plan and structure your answer for this question. Teachers out there, if you're watching this video, his blog, which is just listed there, is also really useful. So he's listed so many ideas that you can just basically steal and try with your students and give them a go, really. Now, what I've done is I took his idea on how to structure this question, and I've tested it out with my students, and immediately we have seen within our department an increase in the marks that they've got for this question 5. So I think it's really, really important if you're a teacher to try this with your students. It might not work for all of them, but again, it's another way that you can try. And if you're a student, then you might want to give this a go in a mock exam or in your lesson just to see if it works for you prior to the exam in June. So this idea focuses on creating an interesting structure for this piece of writing, and it works if you're doing the writing to describe or the writing to narrate one. Now, I've nicknamed it the drop, shift, zoom, leave technique, okay, and that's kind of just a way that my kids remember it, but it focuses on considering what the thoughts and feelings of a character, if it's the narrate one, or the thoughts and feelings or atmosphere that you're creating within your piece of writing is. It considers whether you're going to have a motif, so a recurring or dominant idea linked to the atmosphere that you're creating, whether you're going to have one of those in your writing. And then the actual structure of it is drop, shift, zoom, leave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly go through what that means. Okay, so we're going to have a look at an image, considering perhaps what the question would be, and I'll show you how you would plan an answer using this technique. Again, that's the guy that came up with this, so thank you, Nick Wells, and like I said, have a look at his blog for some more ideas. So imagine we have this image for question 5 on paper 1, and it probably would be describe or write a description based on or suggested by the image, okay? And the story might be write about an interesting commute to work or something like that, okay? So it doesn't really matter whether it's the describe or narrate question you're doing. The subtle difference between the two is that with the narration, you're perhaps going to choose at least one character, and you need to consider the plot, so the actual story, so what happens to that character, and you might consider the thoughts and feelings of that character in more detail. Whereas with the describe, there's a greater focus on literally just describing what you can see, hear, taste, touch and smell. But like I said, this works for both. So your drop part, okay, is you're dropping into the image. So you're providing an overview of the 5 senses. So if we're looking at this image, we would think about if we were on that street, what could we see, hear, taste, touch and smell? If it's the narration, you need to start thinking about dropping your narrative voice into the story. So thinking about who is the narrator and what are their thoughts and feelings at the beginning of your story if they were placed within that image. Okay, so that is the drop, so that's the start. So you're providing an overview, you're almost setting the scene for your description or your narration. Now the next part of your writing is the shift. And the shift uses a flashback or a flash forward, okay, and you describe the location that you've been in at a different time of the day or a year. Now this is where you really want to provide a contrast in the atmosphere, okay? So you're thinking about contrasting emotions of the character if it's the narration, or contrasting the atmosphere, contrast in the description, okay? So here I've imagined in my mind that place at night time, okay? So now that might be 6 months prior to the original picture, or it might be a flash forward. But you're thinking about creating a huge contrast in the atmosphere. Then in the next stage of your writing, you return to the original time or location, okay? But you zoom in on a section of that image in your mind or the image that you've been given, okay? So here I've chosen a taxi from that original image, okay? And you've got to consider, why is that one thing that you're zooming in on particularly significant? So why is that one thing important to the narrator if it's writing to narrate that you're doing? So really think about the thoughts and feelings of the character. Does that trigger a memory in the character that's particularly significant? Or if it's the writing to describe, you need to really describe that thing, that one thing in detail. In such detail that your reader can imagine that being there themselves. Okay, so this is the third stage of your writing. And then finally, we leave, okay? We zoom out of the original location. Now, my students were a little bit confused about what to do here. So the way I described it to them was for them to imagine that either they were a leaf or a feather blowing in the wind or a bird flying above the location. So you're providing, again, an overview of what you can see, hear, taste, touch and smell, but away from that original point, okay? Now, if up till that point you have been describing the building that you've been in, if it was inside somewhere, then you then finish by exiting that place and you describe the outside, okay? So the way this structure works is by telling your examiner that you've considered using interesting structural elements such as flashbacks and flash forwards. And you're also going to be providing contrasts in atmosphere, and you're also going to be providing a variety of different descriptions by making sure that you're zooming in and out of that image or the image in your mind. Now, the thoughts and feelings you need to consider and link that to the atmosphere that you're creating. And if you want to use a motif, okay, that's a recurring idea or thought throughout your piece of writing, then again, that's a more interesting structural element, okay, that you can use within your writing. So what I've taken is Nick Wells's example, because I thought this was a great example, just to show how you can plan. So planning this answer is really, really important. So what he did was he took this image, which I think shows a person in a forest. Now he says that perhaps there's poppies on the floor, and some of my students saw it and thought maybe it was just red leaves. But again, it's open to interpretation, so there's no right or wrong answer with this question. Now, the thoughts, feelings and contrasts that he's planned are, the mystery, the creepiness, the confusion, okay? And he's thought about how that links to perhaps sadness, upset, depression, so the thoughts and the feelings. And then the contrasts that he's going to use, perhaps in the shift, are the happiness and contentment and the fact that there is clarity. So within the shift of his writing, he's going to provide those contrasts. The motif that he's chosen, okay, he's actually chosen a few, are that the mist, which is linked to confusion, the red flowers linking to poppies or remembrance, and the stream, okay? So what happens is throughout his piece of writing, he's going to mention the mist, he's going to mention the red flowers, and he's going to mention the stream, okay? So structurally, his drop is that he's literally going to drop into that overview image, okay? He's going to describe the tall trees, he's going to describe the birds, the leaves on the floor, the red flowers, but he's going to link it to his grandfather having just died. So there is a narrative element here, okay? The fact that there is a character and he's considering the thoughts and feelings of that character. His shift then is 6 months earlier, and he thinks about the contrast. So actually walking through the forest with the grandfather and describing him physically. So that's, really considering how his thoughts and feelings were different at that time. It needs to be a happy memory to show that contrast. Then he returns to that original point and he zooms in on a twig, thinking about the texture of it, the strength on it, perhaps what would happen if he stepped on it, and maybe that's linked to the fragility of his grandfather, okay? So again, zooming in on that one thing, but considering why that's relevant. And then he's going to zoom out and leave that point, okay? So it might be that actually he chooses to be a bird. He describes the mist as wrapping itself around him, okay? It's protective but confusing. So structurally, we've got the drop, shift, zoom, leave, but he's tied in those thoughts and feelings and contrasts and the motif as he's moved through his piece of writing. And I think this plan, this example plan, is great. It would work for a narrative piece or it would work for a description. And again, you don't even need to do the question that's related to the image, okay? Because if it's just the word-based question, then you can just picture an image in your mind, okay? So it works for both. Now, have a go at this. See if it works for you. You need to be spending 5 minutes planning. So I reckon you can do this within 5 minutes. You don't need to really write in that much detail. Just literally write down a few bullet points, 5 bullet points for the drop, shift, zoom, leave for each of those sections within the 5 minutes that you've got. Give it a go, see if it works for you. If you do write an answer that you're particularly proud of, please email it through to me via my website, asiaexams.wordpress.com, as I'd really like to show some examples for this and share them, because I know that a lot of students have been asking me for those lately, okay? So have a go, see if it works for you. Again, just another way that you can plan the describe or narrate task. If you've got any questions about this video or any of the other videos on my channel, then you can either tweet me at asiaexams or, like I said, email me through my website. Thanks for listening.